Clara Whitmore did not cry at her father's grave. She pressed her palm flat against the cold stone, breathed once, and made him a promise that everything he had taught her in those quiet evenings, every German word, every column of numbers, every lesson, the world said a woman had no business learning, she would carry it. All of it. And she would not waste a single syllable. 3 months later, she sat at the longest dinner table she had ever seen, and the most dangerous. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow Clara's journey all the way to the end, because what happens next will stay with you. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1817 arrived in Virginia with the kind of heat that made men irritable and women invisible. That was the way of it. The heat pressed down on everything. The fields, the roads, the river bending brown and slow beyond the ridge, and in that pressing weight, people forgot to look carefully at what was right in front of them. Clara Whitmore understood this. She had been overlooked her entire life, and she had learned the way her father taught her to learn everything, to study what that invisibility gave her access to. It gave her access to quite a lot. She had arrived at Harrington Manor in April, 3 weeks after her father's funeral, with one trunk, 2 ledger books she had borrowed from the estate office before anyone thought to stop her, and a letter of introduction that Nathaniel Harrington had sent to her father 6 months prior. A letter that had never been answered because her father had been dead by the time it arrived. The letter asked her father, Edmund Whitmore, if he might be willing to serve as land steward for the Harrington estate's southern holdings. Edmund had managed land for 30 years. He had an uncommon gift for it, the kind of eye that could look at a field and know before the season turned whether it would yield or fail. Nathaniel Harrington had heard of him through 3 separate men whose judgment he trusted. Edmund was dead. But Clara had read the letter. She had thought about it for 2 days. Then she had written back, signed her own name, and explained the situation plainly. Her father had passed. She had no family remaining in Fredericksburg. She had been her father's assistant in matters of land management for 11 years, and if Mr. Harrington was willing to consider an unconventional arrangement, she believed she could serve the estate as well as any man he might otherwise hire. She had expected silence. She had expected at best a polite refusal. What she had not expected was Nathaniel Harrington appearing at her door in person 10 days later, hat in hand, asking her a single question. "Can you read a contract and tell me if it's been altered?" She had looked at him for a moment. Then she had walked to her father's desk, picked up the last contract her father had reviewed, a grain storage agreement with a merchant in Richmond, and pointed to the line where a comma had been shifted 3 words to the right, changing the liability from the merchant to the landowner by a matter of punctuation. Nathaniel Harrington had studied the contract for a long time. Then he had said, "Pack what you need, you'll have your own office." That was 3 months ago. She had not expected to become his wife. She was not certain even now that Nathaniel had expected it either. The proposal had happened with the same directness that seemed to govern everything the man did. It was a Tuesday. She had been in the estate office working through the quarterly accounts when he had appeared in the doorway, not knocking because he never knocked, which she had decided early on to interpret as a sign of respect, rather than dismissal, the way one does not knock before entering a room where one expects a colleague to be working, rather than a servant who must be announced to. He had said, "Miss Whitmore." She had said without looking up, "The Henderson contract has a problem." He had said, "I need to speak with you about something else." She had looked up then. His expression was the one she had come to think of as his working face, the jaw set, the eyes direct, no wasted motion in it. He was not a man who decorated his words. "I am in a situation," he said, "that requires a solution." She waited. "My business in Philadelphia and the arrangements I've been asked to complete before winter require a wife, not for social reasons." He paused. "I've no interest in social reasons. But there are legal matters, property matters that are significantly cleaner when a man is married." She set down her pen. "Are you proposing to me, Mr. Harrington?" "I'm offering you a proposition," he said. "Which is different. You'd have your position here secured permanently, your own income, your own work. I don't need a hostess. I need someone I can trust." She had looked at him for a long moment. "And you trust me?" "I trust your eye for numbers," he said. "That's more than I can say for most people." It was, she had thought, the least romantic proposal in the recorded history of Virginia. She had said yes. She had not expected to be happy. She had not expected sitting beside him at that long table in the great dining room of Harrington Manor, with the summer evening pressing soft and golden through the tall windows and candles burning in their silver holders, and the voices of 8 dinner guests filling the room, to feel anything other than the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had secured her own situation intelligently. She had not expected the feeling that crept in instead. It was something softer than satisfaction. Something that made her notice the way Nathaniel spoke to her, not over her, not around her, but to her, as though her answer was the answer he was waiting for. Something that made her notice the particular quality of silence he maintained. When she was speaking, the way his full attention gathered itself and settled on her words. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself this firmly on the inside, while she smiled politely at the man across the table, who was explaining in animated English how he had recently acquired 300 acres of bottomland in Kentucky. The man's name was Friedrich Brandt. He was from Hamburg originally, though he'd lived in Philadelphia for 6 years and spoke English with only a slight coloring of accent left. He was handsome in a blunt, confident way, and he wore his wealth the way some men wear a new coat, wanting everyone to notice. Beside him sat his wife Isolde, small and pale and quiet, in the particular way of women who have learned that silence is easier than disagreement. Across from them were the Caldwells, Thomas and Margaret. Thomas was Harrington's estate manager, a man of 52, with a thick gray mustache and a way of filling a room with his own importance. He had managed the Northern holdings for 9 years. He had not been pleased when Nathaniel brought Clara on for the Southern accounts. He had expressed this displeasure in small, careful ways, the slightly too long pause before answering her questions, the way he addressed his responses to Nathaniel, even when Clara had asked them the invoices he forgot to send her until a week after she needed them. Clara had noted all of this without comment. She had also noted the number of times the invoices themselves didn't quite add up correctly. She had said nothing yet. She was still counting. At the far end of this table were 2 businessmen from Richmond, whose names she'd already forgotten. A local judge named Hartwell, who kept falling asleep between courses, and Nathaniel's cousin Charles Harrington, who was young and loud, and had the cheerful certainty of a man who had never been wrong about anything important. It was Charles who had arranged this dinner. He'd been visiting from Charleston for 2 weeks, and he seemed to believe that the solution to every problem in Nathaniel's life was more guests and louder conversation. Nathaniel, Clara had noticed, bore his cousin with the patience of a man who has long ago accepted a particular weather pattern. The dinner had been going well enough. And then Friedrich Brandt leaned toward his wife just slightly and said something in German. Clara's hand continued its slow motion of lifting her water glass. She did not look at him. She spoke German. She had spoken it since she was 12 years old, the year her father obtained a set of agricultural texts from a Prussian farming collective, texts that were considered at the time to be among the most advanced in the world, on the subject of soil management and crop rotation. Her father had sat her down at the kitchen table and said quite simply that the best farming knowledge available was written in German, and if she wanted to understand the work they did, she had better learn to read it. So she had. She had not in 3 months at Harrington Manor seen a reason to mention this. What Friedrich Brandt said to his wife in the comfortable German of a man who believed himself safely untranslated was this: "Can you believe this woman? He married her. She looks like she came with the furniture." Isolde murmured something quiet. A soft protest or an agreement, Clara couldn't be certain. Brandt's voice dropped lower, but not lower enough. "No jewels, no family. I asked Charles, she's nobody. A land manager's daughter. He must have lost his mind." Clara set her water glass down very gently. She lifted her fork. She took a small, unhurried bite. Across the table, Thomas Caldwell was saying something to Nathaniel about the harvest projections. Nathaniel was listening, his face turned away from Clara. Charles was laughing at something the Richmond men had said. Judge Hartwell appeared to be sleeping again. Brandt continued warming to his subject with the easy cruelty of a man who believes no one can hear him. I've seen prettier women working the docks in Philadelphia. He could have had anyone. He had to go and marry the bookkeeper. Isolde murmured again. This time Clara heard clearly. Friedrich, please. What? She doesn't understand a word. Look at her. She's just smiling. Clara was in fact smiling. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about the evenings they had spent at the kitchen table in Fredericksburg, going through those Prussian agricultural texts, her father's finger moving along the lines, his voice patient and unhurried. Again, Clara. Read it again. Not until you understand it, until you feel it. She was thinking about how he used to say that the best thing about knowledge was that no one could see it on you until you chose to show it. She set down her fork. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked across the table at Friedrich Brandt. And she said in perfectly clear, precise German, the German of the agricultural texts, the German of scholars and precision, she said, Herr Brandt, you are correct that I came with very little, no jewels, no family name that would impress you. But I have been listening to you for the last quarter of an hour, and I think, if you will forgive my saying so, that you have said quite enough about what I am. Perhaps you might tell us something about what you are. The table went still, not gradually, instantly. The conversation dropped out of the room as though someone had caught it in both hands and held it. Friedrich Brandt's mouth was open. Isolde had gone the color of the tablecloth. Charles made a sound that was almost a laugh and stopped itself. Nathaniel turned. He had been in the middle of a sentence. He left it there unfinished and turned to look at his wife. His expression was one Clara had not seen on his face before. Not the working face, not the polite, formal face he wore for company, not the rare, brief softness she had occasionally caught in the evenings when he thought she was occupied with her reading. This was something new. His dark eyes moved from her face to Brandt's face and back again. He said very quietly, Is there something I've missed? Clara looked at him. Then she looked at Brandt. Mr. Brandt was kind enough to share his opinions about my suitability, she said in English now pleasant and even. In German. He was under the impression I did not speak it. She paused. I should have mentioned it sooner. That is my fault entirely. Brandt had found his voice. Mrs. Harrington. I assure you I meant no. Of course you did, Clara said. She smiled at him with perfect composure. And that is the thing about honesty, isn't it, Mr. Brandt? It is most truthful when it believes itself unheard. The silence around the table had the quality of held breath. Nathaniel was still looking at her. Clara reached for her water glass and took a calm, unhurried sip. The meal ended. It ended the way meals end, when a grenade has been placed beneath the table, not with explosion, but with the very careful, very deliberate movements of people trying to demonstrate that everything is completely fine. Brandt attempted twice to reopen conversation. Both times it died. His wife had gone thoroughly silent. Charles spent the remainder of the dinner studying his plate with unusual interest. Thomas Caldwell watched Clara. She noticed him watching. She did not look back. After the last course was cleared and the guests had dispersed to the parlor or the cooler air of the porch, Clara found herself alone in the dining room for approximately 90 seconds before Nathaniel appeared. He did not go to the head of the table. He crossed the room to where she was standing near the window, looking out at the dark shape of the fields in the late summer evening, and he stopped beside her. He said nothing for a moment. Then, How long have you spoken German? Since I was 12, she said. And you never thought to mention it. No one asked, she said, and it rarely comes up. He was quiet again. She could feel him working something out, not angry, not exactly, but engaged with a thought in the way he got engaged with problems, the total absorption of a man who does not like incomplete information. The Brandt account, he said finally. The purchase agreement for the Richmond grain transport. You flagged a clause last month, the indemnity clause. Yes. You said the German phrasing in the original Hamburg filing created an ambiguity. It did. You read the original Hamburg filing. I did. Nathaniel turned to look at her. His expression was something between assessment and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. "Clara," he said. It was the first time she realized that he had called her by her given name without the formality of her surname following it. Just Clara. Quietly. Like he was testing the weight of it. "Yes," she said. "What else do you know that you haven't told me?" She looked at him for a moment. Outside, she could hear Charles's voice carrying from the porch telling some story loudly. She could hear the lower murmur of the guests. She thought about Thomas Caldwell and the invoices that didn't add up. She thought about the specific number she had calculated 3 days ago, sitting in the estate office at 9:30 in the evening with a candle burning down beside her. The specific number that she was still hoping she had gotten wrong, because getting it right would mean something she was not yet prepared to say out loud. She said, "I need a few more days." He looked at her. "With what?" "The accounts," she said. "I need to be certain before I say anything." Something moved across his face. He did not press her. That was one of the things she had come to depend on, the fact that when she said she needed more time, he gave it to her without demanding explanation, the way most men demanded explanation as the price of basic trust. "All right," he said. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he said, "You were extraordinary tonight." She hadn't expected that. She looked away out the window. "I was simply fluent in the language," she said. "No." His voice was quiet and certain. "You were extraordinary." She did not answer. She wasn't sure what to do with the warmth that moved through her chest at those words, so she filed it away carefully and looked at the dark line of the distant tree line and told herself there was work to do. She had been awake for an hour, the morning after the dinner, when she found Thomas Caldwell waiting for her at the door to the estate office. He was not pleased. "Mrs. Harrington," he said. The title sat awkward in his mouth. He had used Miss Whitmore for the first 2 months and switched to Mrs. Harrington only when Nathaniel was in the room. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. I wonder if I might have a word." She unlocked the office door and went in. She did not invite him to follow, but she did not close the door behind her, which he took as permission. He came in. He did not sit. "About last evening," he said. She set her ledger on the desk. She sat. She waited. "Mr. Brandt is an important business contact. For Harrington and for this region generally." "I see." Whatever occurred during dinner, the nature of it, the language involved, these things can create complications. She folded her hands on the desk. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, "if you are suggesting that I should have allowed a man to insult me in my own home because he is a business contact, I'm afraid we'll have to disagree." He pressed his lips together. "I'm simply saying that there are ways of managing these situations." "I managed it," she said. "It is managed. It has created an atmosphere." "Mr. Caldwell." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Brandt made assumptions about what I could and could not understand. That was his mistake. I corrected it. That is the end of the matter as far as I am concerned." He studied her. She had the sudden clear sense, not for the first time, that Thomas Caldwell was not looking at her the way a man looks at someone he has underestimated. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something that has become a problem. "You are very sure of yourself," he said. "I try to be sure of what I know," she said, "and certain about what I do not yet know. It's a useful distinction." Something flickered in his eyes. He nodded once, turned, and left. Clara watched him go. Then she opened the ledger to the page she had marked the night before, and went back to counting. She had begun to suspect Thomas Caldwell's accounts 5 weeks after her arrival at Harrington Manor. It had not been a dramatic discovery. There was no single number that leaped from the page and announced itself. It was slower than that, and quieter, the slow accumulation of small things that didn't quite align. A delivery recorded on a Tuesday that the mill receipt showed arriving on Thursday. A labor cost for 12 workers on a day when Clara had walked through the south field herself and counted 8. A repair invoice for fencing that listed 30 yards of material when the repaired fence line ran barely 20. Small things. The kind of things that could be error. The kind of things a busy man might overlook. But Clara had been raised by a man who said that when the small things in an account do not add up, you do not assume error. You start asking what they add up to. She had started asking. 6 weeks of careful methodical work, cross-referencing delivery logs with supply receipts, checking labor records against the daily work logs the field hands kept, comparing this year's repair invoices to the repair invoices from 3 years prior, then 5 years prior, looking for the patterns in what was being charged for, and whether the charges tracked with what she could physically verify. The number she had arrived at 3 days ago was $1,140. That was the conservative estimate. If the pattern held for the full span of Caldwell's employment, and she had reason to think it did, the number was considerably larger. $1,140 was, by her calculation, roughly equivalent to what the estate paid in seed costs for a full planting season on the northern holdings. She had not gone to Nathaniel yet. She needed to be certain. She needed every number backed by a corresponding document she could physically put into someone's hands. She needed it to be unassailable, not because she doubted what she had found, but because she knew exactly what would happen if she brought an accusation against a man like Thomas Caldwell without airtight documentation. A man like Caldwell had 9 years of relationship with Nathaniel Harrington. He had a reputation. He had people in the county who would vouch for him, who had known him for decades, who would say with complete sincerity that he was an honest man. Clara had 3 months and a German accent that an important business contact had been insulting over dinner the previous night. She knew how that accounting worked, so she kept counting. The week after the dinner party, Nathaniel was called to Richmond on business. He was gone for 5 days. In those 5 days, Clara worked. She worked in the early mornings before the household was fully awake. She worked in the late evenings after the offices closed. She organized every document she had cross-referenced into a separate ledger, her own, not one of the estate's official books. She dated every entry. She noted every discrepancy with its corresponding evidence. This receipt, this log, this number. On the third evening, she found something she had not expected. She had been reviewing a set of land lease agreements contracts between the Harrington estate and several local farmers who leased parcels of the southern land for their own cultivation. The agreements were standard, the kind her father had drawn up hundreds of times, and she had read through them quickly in her first weeks, without finding anything notable. This time she read them more slowly. One of them had been amended. It was the lease for a parcel of bottomland near the river's bend, 40 acres belonging to a family named Pierce, who had farmed it for 11 years. The original lease, signed in 1812, gave the Pierce family first right of renewal at the agreed rate for 20 years. The amendment, dated 1815, unsigned by any Harrington, removed that clause. In its place was a clause that allowed the estate to terminate the lease with 90 days' notice. The amendment was written in the same hand as the rest of the document, Thomas Caldwell's hand. Clara read the amendment 3 times. Then she sat back in her chair and thought about Henry Pierce, whom she had met twice, a quiet man in his 50s, who brought his hat in his hands when he spoke to anyone connected with the estate, who had mentioned in passing that he'd been worried about the lease renewal coming up next spring. She thought about what it would mean for the Pierce family if that amendment stood. 11 years of work, a family's livelihood. She thought about why Thomas Caldwell would alter a lease agreement for 40 acres of bottomland. And then she thought who would benefit from a Pierce family eviction. She pulled the survey maps. She found the answer in 20 minutes. There was a proposed mill site, a new mill to be built on the river bend that Caldwell had been advocating for in the monthly estate planning meetings for the past 2 years. Nathaniel had been cautious about the investment. The location he'd been shown put it on estate-owned land adjacent to the river, but adjacent, Clara saw now looking at the survey, was doing a great deal of work in that description. The most efficient mill site, the one with the best river access, the one that would actually make the investment worthwhile, was not on the adjacent estate land. It was on the Pierce family's 40 acres. Clara sat for a very long time in the quiet of the estate office. Outside, a summer storm was beginning, the sky going heavy and dark beyond the windows, the first drops of rain tapping against the glass. She thought about Caldwell standing in her office doorway that morning, looking at her with that careful, calculating expression. "You are very sure of yourself." "Yes," she thought, "I am." She picked up her pen and kept writing. Nathaniel returned from Richmond on a Friday evening. She heard his horse in the yard. She heard the voices of the stable hands, and then the house going through its small motions of receiving him. Margaret, the housekeeper, appearing with news of dinner. The kitchen sounds sharpening. She waited until after dinner. She had always thought that the worst place to deliver difficult news was in the first hour of a man's return from a long journey. Her father had taught her that too. Not in so many words, but by example, by the way he would wait, would let a thing settle, would choose the right moment as carefully as he chose his words. After dinner, when Nathaniel had come to the study with his coffee and the day's correspondence, she knocked on the open door. He looked up. Something eased in his expression when he saw her. A very small thing barely visible, but she had been learning to read his face the way she read a ledger. The details mattered. "Clara," he said. "I need to show you something," she said. "When you're ready." He set down his correspondence. "Now is fine," he said. She sat across from him at the desk. She opened her ledger, and she began. She did not hurry. She went through it the way her father had taught her to present an accounting start with the simplest facts, the ones that cannot be argued, and let them build. Do not jump to the conclusion. Take the listener with you step by step, so that by the time you arrive, they have seen everything you have seen, and the conclusion is not a surprise, but an inevitability. Nathaniel listened without interrupting. His face as she went through the numbers did not change in the way she had half feared. She had worried somewhere in the back of her mind that he would dismiss it, would find a reason, would tell her she was mistaken. Men often told women they were mistaken when they found things men had missed. But his face did not do that. What his face did was go very still. The working stillness she'd come to recognize, the total focused absorption, the way everything in him concentrated on the information in front of him. When she reached the amended lease, she placed the document on the desk between them. She pointed to the amendment. She pointed to the survey map. She showed him the mill site. She showed him what it added up to. When she finished, there was silence. The summer rain had come in earnest now, a steady sound against the windows filling the room. Nathaniel did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "How long have you been working on this?" 6 weeks, she said. "I wanted to be certain before I brought it to you." He looked at the ledger, then at her. "You were certain 3 days ago," he said. "You told me you needed a few more days." He had remembered that. She should have known he would. "Yes," she said. "Why 3 more days?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I wanted to make sure," she said, "that what I was bringing you was unassailable. Not because I doubted the numbers, but because I knew that when I put Thomas Caldwell's name on this, people would look for a reason to doubt the source before they looked at the evidence." She met his eyes. "I wanted to make sure there was no reason to find." He held her gaze. She held it back. "Clara," he said. His voice was very quiet. "Has anyone in this house or in this county given you any reason to think you would not be believed?" She thought about the invoice delays, the responses directed to Nathaniel instead of her. The door to the estate office that Caldwell had a habit of half closing when he left her office, as though he wanted the household to know he hadn't been in conference with her, merely passing through. She thought about Friedrich Brandt's voice carrying cheerfully across the dinner table. She thought about 3 months of being impeccably careful. "No one has said anything directly," she said. He understood what she meant. She could see it. He looked down at the ledger again. "I'll need to verify these figures against the original documents," he said, independently. "Not because I doubt you, because I need to be able to say to anyone who asks that I verified them against the originals." "Of course," she said. "I kept the originals separate. They're in the bottom drawer of the secondary filing cabinet. I can show you exactly which ones correspond to each entry." Something crossed his face that she did not immediately identify. It took her a moment. It was respect. Not the comfortable, distant respect of a man who finds a woman adequately capable. Something more direct than that. Something that looked at her the way one professional looks at another who has done a very difficult piece of work very well. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "First thing." "I'll have everything ready," she said. She stood. She was almost to the door when he spoke again. "Clara." She turned. He was still looking at the ledger, his hand resting flat on the open page. "Thank you," he said, "for being careful, and for trusting me with it." She looked at him for a moment in the lamplight, the rain steady against the windows, the house quiet around them. "Yes," she said. And she meant it as more than an answer to what he'd said. She did not sleep much that night. She lay awake in the summer heat, listening to the rain ease and stop, listening to the house settle into its nighttime quiet. And she thought about tomorrow and what it would mean. She thought about the Pierce family and their 40 acres. She thought about Thomas Caldwell, who had spent 9 years building something she had unbuilt in 6 weeks. She thought about her father, who had genuinely believed in the face of a great deal of evidence to the contrary, that knowledge was a kind of armor. That what you knew protected you. That the world in the end rewarded the careful and the honest and the prepared. She had spent a great many years not being sure she believed that. She was beginning to think he might have been right. Outside her window, the summer night after the rain smelled like wet grass and turned earth. The particular smell of a Virginia summer, rich and green, and already moving toward its own ending. She lay in the dark and breathed it in. In a few hours, Nathaniel Harrington would sit down with the documents she had organized and verify every figure she had recorded one by one, and the picture she had built over 6 weeks would hold up under that examination because it was true. Because she had made sure it was true. And after that, something would have to happen. After that, there would be a reckoning. She did not know yet what it would look like. She did not know whether Nathaniel would go to Caldwell directly, or to the county judge, or to the lawyers in Richmond. She did not know whether Caldwell would deny it, or fold, or find some angle she hadn't anticipated. She did not know what it would mean for the estate, or for her position in it, or for the quiet, precise, completely unexpected life she had built here in the 3 months since she had packed one trunk and a set of borrowed ledgers, and stepped into a future she had made for herself, out of nothing but her own nerve and her father's teaching. She did not know what would happen next. What she knew was this. She had done the work. She had done it carefully and completely and without wavering. Whatever came next, she had earned the right to stand in the middle of it and not flinch. Her father had taught her that too. She closed her eyes. The summer night moved around the house, warm and alive, full of crickets and the last dripping from the eaves. Clara Whitmore. Clara Harrington. She corrected herself, still getting used to the shape of it. Lay in the dark and waited for morning. Morning came fast and hard, the way summer mornings do in Virginia. No gentle easing, in just light, suddenly sharp at the window, and the heat already building before 7 o'clock. Clara was in the estate office at 6:30. She had the documents laid out before Nathaniel arrived. Not stacked, not bundled, laid out in sequence, each one positioned beside the corresponding ledger, entry numbered in the margin. In her small, precise hand, so that anyone moving through them would follow the same path she had followed, would see what she had seen in the order she had seen it. She heard his footsteps in the corridor at 6:50. He came in, looked at the desk, looked at her. He said nothing. He sat down. He picked up the first document. Clara sat across from him and waited. This was the part she had not been sure she could do. The sitting still, the not explaining, the allowing the evidence to speak without her voice in front of it. She had spent 6 weeks building this. She knew every number. She knew where every thread led. The urge to walk him through it, to narrate, to make sure he understood exactly what he was looking at, was considerable. She kept her hands folded in her lap and let him read. He read for 40 minutes without speaking. He was methodical. He would read an entry in her ledger, locate the corresponding original document read, that then move back to the ledger. When he found a discrepancy, she had noted he did not look up, he simply made a small sound, almost inaudible, a sound of recognition, and moved on. When he reached the amended lease, he stopped. He read it twice. Then he picked up the survey map she had set beside it and studied it for a long time. Then he set everything down and looked at her. "The mill," he said. "Yes. He's been pushing for that mill for 2 years. I know. The site he showed me." Nathaniel stopped. He looked at the map again. "The site he showed me is 40 yards from the Pierce parcel boundary." "Yes." "He knew I wouldn't sanction buying out an 11-year tenant to build a mill." "I believe so," Clara said. "I think the amended lease was intended to resolve that problem in advance, quietly." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "The Pierces don't know," he said. "I don't believe so. Henry Pierce mentioned the renewal to me in passing about 3 weeks ago. He seemed worried, but he didn't seem to understand why. He just said the terms felt less certain than they used to." Nathaniel put the map down. "How long has Caldwell been doing this?" he said. "The money. The earliest discrepancy I can trace is 1814, she said. But the pattern before that is harder to verify. The records from the years prior are not as complete. If I had more time with the archived ledgers—" "You'll have them," he said. "Whatever you need." She nodded. He stood up. He walked to the window. He stood with his back to her, one hand on the frame, and was quiet for a long time. She watched him. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the particular stillness of a man absorbing a thing he didn't want to be true. Not doubting it. Just carrying the weight of it. Thomas Caldwell had worked for this estate for 9 years. He had attended Nathaniel's first wife's funeral. He had managed the harvest through 2 drought years and 1 flood year, and had done it competently by all external evidence. He had also been stealing, and he had been doing it, Clara thought, with the absolute confidence of a man who believed that no one in that household had either the skill or the position to notice. She had noticed. Nathaniel turned back to her. "I won't go to him yet," he said. "I want the full picture first. The archived ledgers. Everything you need to establish the earliest date." He paused. "Can you have it by end of next week?" "By Thursday," she said. Something moved in his eyes, that same thing she'd seen in the study the night before. Direct, clear, not dressed up in pleasantry. "Clara," he said, "I owe you an apology." She blinked. "For what?" "I hired you for your eye for accounts," he said. "I gave you the Southern holdings because they were, if I'm honest, the simpler half. The half I thought required less oversight." She understood what he was saying. "You didn't think there was anything significant to find," she said. "I thought Caldwell was reliable," he said. "I thought the northern accounts were where the complexity was. I put you on the south because you were new and I didn't want to overwhelm." He stopped. "I was wrong." She looked at him. "You gave me what you had to give," she said. "And I found what was there to find. That isn't something you need to apologize for." "I'm not apologizing for what you found," he said quietly. "I'm apologizing for what I assumed about your capacity." The room was quiet. Outside, the estate was coming alive. She could hear the stable hands, the distant sound of the kitchen, a door somewhere. "All right," she said. "Apology accepted." He looked at her for a moment longer than the words strictly required. Then he nodded once, and they both went back to work. Thomas Caldwell appeared at the estate office door at 9 o'clock that morning. Clara heard him before she saw him, the particular weight of his footsteps, the deliberate quality of his arrival, a man who moves as if he is announcing himself. She was at the secondary filing cabinet when he stepped in. She did not turn around immediately. "Mrs. Harrington," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell." She turned then, a folder of documents in her hands. She set them on the desk with the careful precision of someone doing entirely routine work. His eyes went to the desk. She had cleared it before he arrived. The documents she and Nathaniel had been reviewing were gone, replaced with the ordinary working materials of a Thursday morning. She watched him clock this. She watched him decide what it meant. "Mr. Harrington returned last evening," he said. "He did. I trust his business in Richmond went well." "You would have to ask him," she said pleasantly. "I don't manage his business travel." Caldwell's mustache moved in the small way it did when he was containing an expression. "Of course. I only mention it because I had hoped to speak with him this morning, and he doesn't appear to be in the main house. He left early," she said. This was true. Nathaniel had gone out to the northern fields at 7, which she knew because he had told her, and she had deliberately not mentioned this to anyone. "I'm not certain when he'll return." "I see." He shifted his weight slightly. A small tell she had noticed before he did it when he was recalculating. "I had wanted to discuss the autumn planning schedules. Perhaps you could pass along the message." "Certainly," she said, "though I expect he'll be available after midday if it's urgent." "It isn't urgent," he said. He didn't leave. Clara turned back to the filing cabinet. She pulled a folder, looked at it, replaced it. She was perfectly comfortable with silence. She had grown up in a house where her father read for hours at a time, and they had learned to exist in quiet, without it meaning anything was wrong. Caldwell, she had noticed, was not comfortable with silence. "Mrs. Harrington," he said again, and now his voice had a different texture, smoother, the texture of a man moving toward something. "I have been thinking about our conversation the other day." She turned to look at him. "Oh. I may have expressed myself clumsily," he said. "Regarding the Brant dinner, I want you to understand my only concern was the smooth operation of the estate's business relationships. Nothing personal was intended." Clara studied him. This was interesting. Thomas Caldwell was not the kind of man who apologized. She had seen him navigate 3 months of small conflicts with the supply merchants, with the field supervisors, with Nathaniel himself on one occasion, and he had never once said he was sorry. He explained. He redirected. He found a way to make his original position seem like the reasonable one all along. He was apologizing now, which meant he was worried. "I understand," she said. No offense was taken. He seemed to expect more. When it didn't come, he nodded carefully. "Good," he said. "Good. I want us to work well together, Mrs. Harrington. I know it hasn't always been. I know the communication between our offices could be improved. I'd like to make that a priority." "That would be welcome," she said. She smiled at him. He smiled back. They understood each other perfectly. The archived ledgers were kept in the basement storage room beneath the north wing in a state of organization that would have made her father quietly furious. They were sorted loosely by year, but within each year, the documents were bundled rather than filed tied with cord that had gone brittle in the summer heat, some of it barely holding. Clara worked through them over 3 days. She worked with 2 candles and a written key she had made for herself. A reference sheet that let her cross-check against the figures she'd already compiled without having to hold the whole structure in her head. She sat on a low stool with the documents spread around her on the stone floor, moving through them methodically, 1 year at a time, going back. On the second day, she found 1811. 1811 was the year the pattern started. Not the dramatic beginning she might have imagined, not a sudden large theft, not an obvious single moment. It started with $11 on a repair invoice for the barn roof. She would have missed it if she hadn't known what she was looking for. But she knew the shape of it by now, the particular way a number was shifted, and she found it at the bottom of an invoice dated March of 1811, and she wrote it down. $11 in March of 1811. By 1815, the annual total was in the hundreds. By 1816, it was pushing past 700. She sat on her stool in the basement with the candles burning down beside her and looked at 6 years of careful, patient, incrementally escalating theft, and she thought he was testing. The early years were testing, seeing how small he could go and still have it add up, seeing whether anyone would ever look. No one had looked. Until now. She wrote the final figure in her ledger, $4,312. Conservative. The numbers she couldn't verify with absolute certainty she had not included: $4,312. She closed the ledger. She sat in the quiet of the basement room for a moment, candles steady in the still air, and breathed. Then she picked up everything and went upstairs. She found Nathaniel in the north pasture, which was not where she would normally have gone to find him. But Margaret had told her he hadn't come in for the midday meal, and it was past 3 o'clock now, and she was not going to wait until evening for this. He was with the farrier examining one of the horse's feet. He heard her coming across the field. She was not trying to be quiet, and he looked up. Something in her face told him immediately. He said something to the farrier low, and the farrier moved away with the horse. Nathaniel came toward her. "You found it," he said. 1811, she said. "That's when it started. 6 years. She held the ledger out to him. "The total I can verify with absolute certainty is $4,312. There may be more I couldn't pin down precisely." He took the ledger. He looked at the final figure. He was very still. Then, 4,312, she said. "Yes." He closed the ledger. The summer afternoon was heavy around them. Heat sitting in the air like something solid, the distant sound of work in the fields carrying across the flat ground. "I want to bring in Judge Hartwell," Nathaniel said, "and the Richmond lawyers, before I speak to Caldwell directly." "I think that's wise," she said. "I'll send letters today." He looked at her. "Will you come with me when I meet with them?" She had not expected the question. "You want me there?" "You built the case," he said. "You know it better than I do. I want you there." She thought about sitting in a room with Judge Hartwell and the Richmond lawyers. She thought about what it would mean, a woman 3 months married presenting a fraud case against a man with 9 years of established relationship with the estate and the county, and every person of standing in between. She thought about what her father would say. "Know it better than they do, Clara. Make it impossible to argue with." "Yes," she said. "I'll come." Nathaniel looked at her with that direct, uncomplicated gaze of his. "Good," he said. And then very quietly, almost as if he hadn't intended to say it, "I don't know how you did this. 6 weeks in the margins of everything else. The Southern accounts running clean, no one noticing, and you building this at the same time." She looked away across the field. "My father used to say that the most important work is often the work no one sees you doing," she said. "He said visible effort is for people who need to be watched. Real work happens in the quiet." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like he was a remarkable man." "He was," she said. "He also said that anyone who tells a girl she doesn't need to know mathematics is someone who wants to keep something from her. So he made sure I could count." Nathaniel made a sound that was almost a laugh, not quite, not fully, but close. She had not heard it from him before. It suited him. "Thank God he did," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression that had no name she could put to it yet, but which she had been noticing more frequently in the past week. Something that was trying to say something his words hadn't managed yet. She looked away before either of them had to account for it. "I'll have the full documentation organized tonight," she said. "Everything you need for the meeting with Hartwell." "Clara." She stopped. "You don't have to do it tonight," he said. "It'll keep until morning." She looked back at him. "I know," she said. "But I want it done." He nodded once, understanding. She walked back toward the house. The meeting with Judge Hartwell was scheduled for the following Tuesday. The 2 days between were the longest Clara had sat still in 6 weeks. She had done her work. The ledgers were organized, the documents cross-referenced, the numbers verified 3 times over. There was nothing more to add. All she had to do was wait. She was very bad at waiting. She busied herself with the regular work of the Southern accounts, which had always been orderly under her management and continued to be, and she answered correspondence, and she walked the property twice in 2 days, checking on the field work, and she spent an hour in the kitchen, talking with Dorothea the cook about the autumn food stores, because Dorothea was the kind of woman who spoke plainly about what she knew, and it was restful to be in that company. On Sunday evening, she was in the parlor reading when Charles appeared. Charles Harrington. 24 years old, loud, harmless, genuinely fond of his cousin, in the way of a man who admires someone he knows he'll never equal. He had been at the estate for almost a month now, and showed no signs of leaving. He dropped into the chair across from her. "You are the most seriously employed person I have ever met," he announced. "Even when you're reading, you look like you're working." Clara looked up from her book. "What am I supposed to look like?" "I don't know. Relaxed. Decorative." "Decorative," she repeated. He had the grace to hear himself. "Not," he started. "I meant—" "I know what you meant, Charles." He subsided. He was not a bad man. He just spoke before he thought, which was a quality that was charming in a 24-year-old with no real responsibilities, and somewhat more alarming in a grown man with any. "The Brant business," he said after a moment. "I owe you an apology for that." She looked at him. This was the second apology she'd received in 4 days. Something was happening in the social weather of Harrington Manor, and she was not entirely sure how to read it. "What for?" she said. "I knew he was Friedrich can be cutting. I should have warned Nathaniel. Or warned you." He shook his head. "I didn't think he'd be so in someone's home, no less. And you just answered him clean as anything." He grinned. "I nearly fell out of my chair. Nathaniel's face. Lord." "What was his face?" Charles tilted his head. "You didn't see it. I wasn't looking at him, and—" "He looked," Charles considered. "I've known my cousin his whole life. I have seen him angry and tired and satisfied, and this one time when he was 17 and fell off a horse in front of a girl he liked, embarrassed. But I have never seen him look the way he looked at you in that moment." He paused. Like he'd been handed something he didn't know he was missing. Clara said nothing. She looked back at her book. She was not reading a word of it. "He's different since you came," Charles said. He wasn't teasing now. He sounded almost tentative, which was not a quality she associated with him. "You notice things about how he is." "I notice things about a great many people," she said carefully. "He used to eat dinner alone most nights, or work through it. Now he comes to the table." He paused. "He listens when you talk. Not the polite listening he does when he's being patient with someone. The real kind." Clara turned a page she had not read. "Charles," she said, "was there something you needed, or did you come to give me a character report on your cousin?" He laughed, and the sound was young and genuine, and broke the strange tension in the room. "Just company," he said. "I'm bored." "Read a book." "I've read all the good ones." "Then read a bad one. The experience is instructive." He laughed again. And then, because he was who he was, and silence made him fill it, he talked for the next half hour about the horse he was planning to buy in Charleston, and the racing circuit, and a girl he had danced with at a party in June. And Clara listened with half her attention, and gave the other half to Charles's words from earlier, that she was working very hard to set aside, like he'd been handed something he didn't know he was missing. She turned another unread page. Tuesday came. Judge Hartwell arrived at 9 in the morning, accompanied by a man named Samuel Graves, the Richmond lawyer Nathaniel trusted most. They met in the main study, Nathaniel at the head of the desk, Hartwell and Graves across, and Clara at the side table with the documents. She had been uncertain right up until she walked into that room about how this would go. Not about the evidence. The evidence was solid. But about her presence in it, whether Hartwell would speak around her, whether Graves would address his questions to Nathaniel, rather than her, whether she would spend this meeting as a document holder, rather than the person who had built the case. Graves looked at her when she sat down and said, "Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Harrington tells me you've been managing the Southern accounts." "I have," she said. "And this investigation, the documentation, that's your work." "It is." He nodded as if this was simply information he required, no more and no less. "Then I'll have my questions for you primarily. I hope that's agreeable." "Entirely," she said. She caught Nathaniel's eye across the room. She looked away before either of them could make anything of it. Hartwell, who was not asleep today, leaned forward in his chair and put on his reading glasses and looked at the first document she placed before him. And the work began. She walked them through it. She did not hurry, and she did not slow down for anything other than direct questions. She explained the cross-referencing method. She walked through the discrepancy pattern. She showed the escalation by year. She put the amended lease in front of them and let them read it, and then put the survey map beside it. Graves asked sharp, precise questions, the kind that came from a man who was already converting what she said into legal language. She answered everyone directly. Hartwell asked fewer questions. He mostly read and looked and occasionally made a sound that was not quite speech, but communicated his ongoing registration of what he was seeing. When she put the final figure on the table, the total $4,312, with the supporting calculations, Graves took off his glasses, polished them, and put them back on. "Mrs. Harrington," he said, "how long did this take you?" 6 weeks for the primary investigation, she said. 3 more days for the archived records. Did you have any formal legal or accounting training? No, she said. My father was a land manager. He taught me accounting as a practical skill. Graves looked at her steadily. You should have been a lawyer, he said. She smiled at that just slightly. I believe the occupation is not currently available to me. Regrettable, he said with the dry simplicity of a man who genuinely meant it. Nathaniel had said nothing for the entire hour. He sat at the head of the desk with his hands folded and watched, and Clara had been aware of his attention on her throughout that quality of concentrated focus she'd come to recognize, but she had not returned it. She had work to do. Now Hartwell took his glasses off and sat back. Nathaniel, he said, this is serious. I know, Nathaniel said. The monetary amount alone is enough for criminal charges. The lease tampering is another matter entirely, that's forgery. Hartwell looked at Clara. Your documentation, Mrs. Harrington, it's meticulous. I've seen cases brought to court with a quarter of this backing. I wanted it to be unassailable, she said. It is, Hartwell said simply. The question now is how you want to proceed. Nathaniel unfolded his hands. I want to speak with Caldwell directly first, he said. Before anything legal moves forward, I want to hear what he says. Hartwell nodded slowly. That's your right. I'd suggest having Graves present. And Mrs. Harrington, Nathaniel said. Hartwell looked at him. She built it, Nathaniel said. She should be in the room when it's used. There was a brief pause. Hartwell looked at Clara. He looked at Nathaniel. Fair enough, he said. They sent for Thomas Caldwell that afternoon. Clara did not know what she had expected from herself in the hour before he arrived. She had thought she would be calm, the way she had been calm through all of it, the methodical quiet of someone doing necessary work. Instead, she found herself standing at the window of the study, hands still watching the road. And she was not calm exactly. She was something else. Something that had been compressed for a long time and was now very slowly beginning to take up its full space. Her father had been dismissed twice in his working life by men who questioned his figures without checking them. The second time it had damaged his reputation enough that he lost a position it had taken him years to build. He had never complained about it. He had simply worked harder, more carefully, more quietly. She thought about that now. She heard the footsteps in the corridor. She turned. Nathaniel was at the desk. Graves sat to one side. Hartwell had positioned himself slightly removed observer and witness. The door opened. Thomas Caldwell walked in. He took in the room in one sweep. His eyes moved from Nathaniel to Graves to Hartwell, and in that fraction of a second, she saw him calculate and then arrive at something uncertainty. He had not known Graves and Hartwell would be here. His eyes reached Clara last. They stayed on her for just a moment too long. In that moment, she saw him understand. Not the details, he couldn't know the details yet, but the shape of it. The shape of why these men were in this room on this Tuesday afternoon when he had been given no advance notice of a meeting. He sat. He arranged himself in the chair with the confidence of long habit. "Nathaniel," he said, "I didn't realize this was a formal occasion." "It is," Nathaniel said. He didn't gesture to Clara. He didn't explain her presence or apologize for it or frame it for Caldwell's comfort. He simply said it is, and picked up the top document from the stack in front of him. "I have some questions about the accounts," Nathaniel said. "Mrs. Harrington will walk us through the specifics." Caldwell turned to look at her again. She met his eyes. She picked up the ledger. She opened to the first page, and she began. He denied it for 11 minutes. She knew because she counted. He said the delivery discrepancies were supplier errors. He said the labor counts were a logging issue. He'd discussed it with the field supervisors. He said the repair invoices, he had an explanation for each one produced smoothly without hesitation, the explanations of a man who had kept them in reserve. Clara did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply moved to the next document, and the next. Graves asked 2 questions, both precise and quiet, and Caldwell answered them, and Clara set down the evidence that contradicted the answers without comment. At 11 minutes, she placed the amended lease on the table. Caldwell looked at it. He said nothing for the first time. "This is the lease for the Pierce family's bottomland parcel," Clara said. "I have the original from 1812 here as well. If you'd like to compare the two, the amendment is in the second paragraph." Silence. Hartwell shifted in his chair. Caldwell was very still now, all the smoothness of his earlier posture replaced by something denser. He was staring at the lease. His jaw was set. "The amendment is not signed," Graves said conversationally, "by Mr. Harrington, or by the Pierce family, or by anyone other than yourself, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell looked at Nathaniel. For the first time, something cracked through the surface of his expression. "Nathaniel," he said, and the voice was different now, rougher, stripped of its professional polish. 9 years. 9 years I've managed this estate." "I know," Nathaniel said quietly. "There are things I've done for this estate that you have no idea about. Problems I handled before they reached you. Decisions I made in the field because there wasn't time to consult." "I don't doubt it," Nathaniel said. "Then you know what I'm worth to this operation. You know what it costs to replace a man who knows this land the way I do." "I know what it cost to have one who didn't know it well enough," Nathaniel said. "The Pierce family has farmed that land for 11 years. Henry Pierce has a right of renewal that was written into his lease, and that you altered without his knowledge or mine. Tell me why." Caldwell looked at him for a long time. Clara sat with her hands folded on the ledger and waited. "The mill," Caldwell said finally. "It's the right investment. You're too cautious with this estate, Nathaniel. Always have been. The mill on that site would double the processing capacity. It would require displacing a family that's done nothing wrong," Nathaniel said. "Without their knowledge and without mine." "That's not." Caldwell stopped. "And the money," Nathaniel said. He was very quiet. "The money, Thomas." The room was entirely still. Caldwell's eyes went back to Clara. They rested on her with an expression she recognized. Now she had seen it in the doorway of her office 3 days after the dinner party. Not contempt anymore. Something harder than contempt. He had known, she realized. From the moment she arrived, some part of him had known that the woman Nathaniel Harrington had brought in to manage the Southern accounts was a risk he had not been able to calculate. He just hadn't known what she was capable of until it was too late. She met his gaze without looking away. $4,312, she said quietly. "That's the figure I can verify. That's what the documentation shows." Caldwell turned his face from her. He did not deny it. He looked at the table in front of him. He looked at his own hands. And then something went out of him, not dramatically, not with any sound, just a slow, visible deflation, as though a structure that had been holding its shape by tension alone had finally been released. "What happens now?" he said. Nathaniel looked at Graves. Graves looked at his papers. In the quiet of the study with the summer afternoon, pressing warm against the windows, Clara set her ledger down on the table and thought of her father. She thought about what he would say about this moment. She thought he would probably say nothing. He would look at the numbers on the table. He would look at the men around it. And then he would look at her, and in his quiet, unhurried way, he would nod. Just once. There it is, Clara. There it is. She kept her hands still and her face composed and let the room move around her. She had done what she came to do. The rest was in other people's hands now. And that she found sitting in the summer heat of Nathaniel Harrington's study with justice on the table between them was enough. The news traveled faster than Clara had expected. She had thought naively, she realized afterward, that the matter of Thomas Caldwell would remain contained. Nathaniel was a private man. Graves was a professional. Hartwell was old enough and experienced enough to understand the value of discretion. She had assumed they would handle it quietly the way serious things in serious households were handled, carefully, without fanfare, with the minimum number of people knowing the maximum amount of truth. What she had underestimated was Thomas Caldwell himself. By Wednesday morning, less than 18 hours after he had sat in Nathaniel's study and watched $4,000 of evidence placed before him, without a word of effective denial, word had begun to move through the county. Not the truth. Not the careful, documented, verified truth she had spent 6 weeks building. Something else. Something shaped very differently. Dorothea told her, first, the way Dorothea told her most things, sideways while doing something else, her hands occupied and her eyes elsewhere, which was how she delivered information she suspected would not be welcome. "There's talk," Dorothea said over the kitchen table Thursday morning, not looking up from the bread she was working. "In town. About Mr. Caldwell's departure." Clara set down her coffee cup. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that starts with 'I heard' and ends with something nobody actually witnessed." Dorothea shaped the dough with practiced efficiency. "The version going around Mitchell's store is that Caldwell was let go because management of the estate changed hands. That there's a new influence in the house that isn't favorable to experienced staff." Clara was quiet for a moment. "New influence," she said. "That's the polite version. And the impolite version." Dorothea looked up. She had the direct, unsentimental gaze of a woman who has seen a great deal and been surprised by very little of it. That a young wife with ambitions persuaded her husband to dismiss a loyal employee so she could expand her own authority over the accounts. The words landed cleanly, the way a slap lands, not the pain of it, so much as the shock that it arrived at all. Clara breathed in once. Out. "I see," she said. "I'm not saying it's true," Dorothea said, returning to the bread. "I know what I've seen in this house for 3 months. I know what kind of work you do and how you do it. I'm telling you what's being said because you should know." "Who's saying it?" "Started with the Caldwell household. His wife is telling it to anyone who'll listen." Dorothea paused. "And the Brants are still in Richmond. Mrs. Brant has been calling on people." Clara picked her coffee cup back up. She held it in both hands. Isolde Brant. Small and quiet and quick to murmur soft disagreements that didn't go anywhere. She had not thought Isolde Brant was paying that much attention. She had been wrong. "Thank you," she said to Dorothea. "Don't thank me," Dorothea said. "Just decide what you're going to do about it." "Ugh." She went to Nathaniel immediately. She found him in the north field, which was becoming a habit, and she walked out to him without waiting for a better moment, because in her experience, better moments had a way of not arriving. He saw her coming and dismissed the field hand he'd been talking with. "Clara." "There's a story circulating in the county," she said. She told him what Dorothea had told her. All of it. Plainly, without softening the edges. His face went through several things in quick succession. She watched them move across it, first a tightening the way his jaw set when something angered him, then something slower and more careful, then a stillness she couldn't read. "Caldwell," he said. "His household is the source," she said. Whether he directed it deliberately, or whether his wife acted on her own, I can't say. It doesn't matter which. His voice was quiet and even, which she had learned was not a sign of calm, but of the kind of controlled anger that ran deeper than shouting. The damage is the same. Yes. He looked at her. How are you? He said. The question surprised her. She hadn't expected it. She had expected strategy, what to do, how to respond, whom to speak with. She had not expected him to ask how she was. She thought about answering him professionally. She almost did. Instead, she said, I'm angry. He held her gaze. So am I, he said. They stood in the summer heat of the north field, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Nathaniel said, I'm going to host a dinner. She looked at him. A formal dinner, he said. At the house. I'm going to invite Hartwell and Graves and the 3 county commissioners and Reverend Alcott and the Hendersons and the McAllisters and anyone else in this county whose opinion carries weight. He paused. And I'm going to invite Friedrich Brandt. Clara stared at him. You're going to invite Brandt. I want him in the room, Nathaniel said. I want his wife in the room. I want every person in this county who has heard Thomas Caldwell's version of events to be in the same room when the actual version is presented. He was looking at her with absolute directness. This isn't only about clearing your name, she said slowly. This is about the Pierce family. The Pierce family deserves to have their lease publicly restored, he said. And the county deserves to know why Caldwell was dismissed. And you... He stopped. He started again. You deserve to have what you did spoken out loud in front of people so that it cannot be quietly rewritten afterward. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to do this, she said. I know I don't, he said. I want to. She thought about the story moving through Mitchell's store. She thought about Isolde Brandt making calls. She thought about being careful and quiet and methodical for 6 weeks and having the story of it turned inside out by a man's wounded dignity. All right, she said. When end of next week, he said. That's enough time to get the invitations out and have people arrange to attend. She nodded. I'll need to speak with Graves beforehand, she said, about how the documentation should be presented. Publicly is different from a private meeting. I know, he said. I want your judgment on it. On all of it. She looked away across the field. He meant it. That was the thing about Nathaniel Harrington. He said things he meant, and he meant things plainly, and it left very little room for comfortable misunderstanding. I'll talk to Graves today, she said. What she had not anticipated was Charles. He found her in the estate office that afternoon, and he was not his usual loose, easy self. He sat down across from her desk, and he looked at her with something serious in his face that she had not seen from him before. I've heard what people are saying, he said. Most of the county has, she said. I want you to know, Charles. She looked at him. Whatever you want to tell me, I believe you. I don't need the reassurance right now. What I need is to finish preparing documentation for a meeting with Samuel Graves. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I owe you more than an apology. She set down her pen. What do you mean? The dinner, he said. The Brandt dinner. I arranged it. I invited Friedrich. I knew what he was like, not as bad as he turned out to be, but I knew he could be cutting. I thought it would be fine. I thought you could handle yourself. He paused. I told myself that to make it easier, but what I actually thought was that it wasn't my problem. She looked at him. He was 24 years old, and he was sitting very still, and he looked more like his cousin in that moment than he usually did. It wasn't your fault, she said. What Brandt said. No, he agreed. But I set the table for it. And you handled it with more dignity than anyone had a right to expect. And now someone is using that night to tell a story about you that isn't true. And I... He stopped. I want to tell Nathaniel what I saw that evening. Properly. Not the version I told him after, which was honestly more impressed than informative. The version that makes clear what Brandt said and how you responded. Clara looked at him for a long moment. Charles, she said. "Do you know what most people would have done in my position, at that table?" Said nothing. He said immediately, "Yes," she said. "And Thomas Caldwell has spent 3 months assuming I was the kind of person who says nothing. He assumed it right up until I put $4,000 of evidence on the table in front of him." She picked up her pen. "The people who underestimate the quiet ones always do." Charles was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, "He doesn't underestimate you." She did not ask who he meant. She looked back at her papers. "Go tell Nathaniel what you saw," she said. "If you want to. It may be useful at the dinner." "Will you be all right?" he said. "Charles," she said, "I have been all right through considerably worse than this. Go on." He went. The dinner was set for Friday evening. 16 guests. The study was too small, and the parlor was awkward for formal seating. So Nathaniel had the long dining table extended with the 2 leaves it rarely used, and the room where Friedrich Brandt had made his opinions about Clara known in German became the room where every important person in the county sat down to a meal on a Friday evening in late August. Clara helped plan the seating. She was aware of the symmetry. She was sitting at this table again, not as the quiet woman in the plain dress who did not understand what was being said, but as the person who had decided what the evening would accomplish and how. She put Hartwell at Nathaniel's right. She put Graves across from the 2 county commissioners who were most likely to be skeptical. She put Reverend Alcott near the center where his reactions would be visible to the room. She put Friedrich and Isolde Brandt at the far end far enough from Nathaniel that they would have to listen before they could respond. Henry Pierce was there. That had been Nathaniel's insistence, and Clara had agreed immediately. Henry was quiet and slightly overwhelmed by the company, and he sat beside his wife near the center of the table and did not know yet why he had been invited. She intended to tell him before the evening was over. The dinner began. It was nothing like the last one. The conversation was civil and careful in the way of people who know something significant is about to happen and are not entirely sure what shape it will take. Nathaniel was a composed host, not warm, not exactly, but present and attentive, in a way that commanded the room without dominating it. Clara ate. She was not nervous. She had thought she would be, and she was not. She was simply ready the way she had been ready for the meeting with Graves, the way she had been ready for Caldwell to walk into the study. She had built this moment document by document, and there was nothing in it now that could surprise her. Friedrich Brandt was making an effort. She could see it from across the table, the slightly more careful quality of his conversation, the way he addressed his remarks to Nathaniel, rather than performing for the room. His wife sat beside him, and ate very neatly, and said almost nothing. The first course cleared, the second arrived. And then Nathaniel set down his fork. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He simply set down his fork, and something in the way he did it, the quiet deliberateness of it, pulled every conversation in the room to a stop. "I want to share some information with all of you," he said, "about why I asked you here this evening." The room was very still. Henry Pierce looked up from his plate. "3 months ago," Nathaniel said, "I hired a land manager for the Southern accounts. Some of you know her as my wife. I want to be clear about the order of those 2 things. She was my colleague before she was my wife, and what she has accomplished in those 3 months in a professional capacity is what I want to speak about tonight." Clara felt the attention of the room shift to her. She did not move. "What she found," Nathaniel continued, "and what I am going to share with Judge Hartwell, Mr. Graves, and the commissioners present, concerns the management of this estate over the past 6 years. Specifically, it concerns the actions of Thomas Caldwell, who served as estate manager for the Northern Holdings during that time." He nodded to Clara. She picked up the document she had placed face down beside her plate. She began. She did not read from it. She knew it well enough by now that she could speak the figures without looking at the paper, which meant she could look at the room. She watched the faces as she spoke Hartwell's careful, contained expression, Graves's professional stillness, the commissioners leaning forward slightly as the numbers accumulated. She watched Brandt. He was listening. Something had shifted in his face from the beginning of her speaking, the comfortable dismissiveness, replaced by something more attentive. He was listening the way a businessman listens when the numbers are significant enough to require it. His wife was watching Clara. Clara looked at Isolde Brandt for a moment, just a moment, and then looked back to the room. She placed the amended lease on the table. She described what it was and what had been changed. She passed it to Hartwell, who examined it and passed it to Graves. And then she looked at Henry Pierce. Henry Pierce was 52 years old, and he had the look of a man who worked outdoors every day of his life. He had sat through the preceding 15 minutes in increasing visible confusion, not understanding why the accounts of the Harrington estate were being discussed at a dinner he had been invited to. He understood the moment she addressed him. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "the lease agreement you signed in 1812 included a first right of renewal at the agreed rate for 20 years. I want you to know that that clause is still in force. The amendment that was made to your document in 1815 was made without authorization, and it has no legal standing. You have Mr. Harrington's word and Mr. Graves's professional confirmation on that." Henry Pierce stared at her. His wife, a small woman beside him, who had been very quiet, made a sound that was not quite speech. Nathaniel said, "Your family's lease is secure, Henry. I should have told you sooner. I didn't know there was anything to tell." Henry Pierce looked from Nathaniel to Clara. His face was doing several things at once that were difficult to watch without some private echo of emotion. "We thought," he said. His voice was not steady. "This spring we thought we might lose it. Martha's been, we thought—" "You won't lose it," Nathaniel said. The woman beside Henry Pierce put her hand over her mouth. She turned her face away. The room was very quiet. Clara set her paper down. She looked at the table in front of her, and she did not let herself feel it fully yet. The thing that was trying to rise in her chest because there was more to do. But she noted it the way she noted important figures in the margin of a ledger this moment here. This is what the 6 weeks were for. Friedrich Brandt spoke after dessert. Clara had not expected him to. She had thought he would sit through the evening and leave, and whatever recalculation he needed to do, he would do it privately. Men like Friedrich Brandt, in her experience, did not often make public acknowledgement of being wrong. He had not drunk much wine. She noticed that. He had been careful all evening. He stood, which was unusual. No one else had stood except Nathaniel, and he said, "Mr. Harrington." Nathaniel looked at him. "I owe your wife an apology," Brandt said. "A public one, since my original offense was committed in company." He looked at Clara. His German accent was slightly more present than usual, which she found meant he was less in control of the performance. "Mrs. Harrington, what I said at the last dinner in this room was inexcusable. I was not aware of who you were. That is not an excuse, it is simply the only explanation I have. I was wrong." The room was extremely still. Clara looked at him. She had thought about what she would say if something like this happened. She had not been sure it would. She had prepared for the version of this evening where Brandt sat silent and cold, and left without addressing her. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Brandt. I accept your apology." Simple, clean, no addendum, no magnanimity performed for the room, no speech about forgiveness. Just accepted. Brandt sat down. His wife looked at Clara across the table. Just looked for a moment, a direct, clear look, the look of a woman who has spent a great deal of time sitting quietly and watching and has more going on behind her eyes than most people have taken the trouble to find out. Clara looked back at her. Something passed between them. Clara didn't have a word for it. She filed it away. After dessert and before the guests had begun to leave, Charles found her near the window. He said nothing for a moment, just stood beside her. "You knew Brandt would apologize," he said finally. "I thought he might," she said. "He's a businessman. He heard the numbers tonight. He knows now that I read the Hamburg contract and flagged an error that would have cost him money. He's recalculating the value of having me as an adversary versus an ally." Charles stared at her. "That's very unsentimental," he said. "That's how it works," she said. "Some people apologize because they feel sorry. Some people apologize because they've done the arithmetic. Both kinds of apology get accepted the same way." Charles made a sound. It might have been a laugh or something more serious. Nathaniel was watching you the whole time, he said. I know. Not in the way he watches a business meeting. I want to be clear about the distinction. Charles, I'm just saying. I know what you're saying. And she looked out the window. The summer night beyond the glass was soft and dark stars showing faintly. And, she said, I have enough to think about without adding that to it. That's not the same as it not being there, he said. She looked at him. He put his hands up in a gesture of surrender, but he was not quite suppressing a smile. I'll go bother someone else, he said. Please do, she said. He went. The guests left gradually. Judge Hartwell shook her hand properly the way he would shake a man's hand and said, "Exceptional work, Mrs. Harrington." The commissioners were cordial. Graves told her he would have the documentation formally entered before the end of the month. Henry Pierce was one of the last to leave. He stood at the door with his hat in both hands, and he looked at her the way her father used to look at a piece of land that had come back after a hard season, like something had been restored that he'd been afraid was gone for good. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You don't need to, she said. We thought we'd lose everything, he said. 11 years. Martha's been... He stopped. He started again. She didn't sleep right for months. Clara looked at him. Mr. Pierce, she said. The work was there to be done. I did it. That's all. She paused. Make sure Mr. Graves sends you a copy of the original lease terms. Keep it somewhere safe. He nodded. He pressed her hand briefly with the rough grip of a man unused to the gesture. Then he put his hat on and went out into the summer night. She stood in the doorway and watched him go. The house emptied slowly, the way houses do after long evenings. The silence settling back in layers. Clara stood in the dining room and looked at the table. The extended leaves, the emptied chairs, the marks of the evening, a smudged glass here, a folded napkin there. The places where 16 people had sat and heard the truth stated plainly. She heard him before she saw him. Nathaniel's footstep. She knew it by now as well as she knew the sound of the estate settling at night, or the particular creak of the estate office door. He came to stand beside her. They looked at the table together. Well, he said. Well, she said. A moment passed. Hartwell told me on his way out that he's never seen a cleaner piece of financial investigation, Nathaniel said. In his exact words, your wife has a mind like a steel trap, and she's quieter about it than she has any right to be. Clara pressed her lips together to contain the smile. He's not wrong on the second part, she said. No, Nathaniel agreed. Another moment. The evening air moved through the room warm and dark. The Pierces, he said. I know. Henry looked. I know, she said again. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about the $11, he said. That's where you said it started. 1811, $11 on a barn roof invoice. Yes. If you hadn't gone through the archived ledgers, someone would have, she said. It wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it, but she said it anyway because the alternative, the version where no one ever went back far enough, where the Pierces lost their land, and the mill got built on their bottomland, and Thomas Caldwell retired comfortably, was not a version she wanted to give weight to tonight. Nathaniel turned to look at her. She could feel it before she turned to meet it, that quality of his attention, which was different from the way other people paid attention. Most people's attention skimmed the surface of you. His landed. Clara, he said. She turned. He was closer than she had registered in the way of a room that has emptied, and two people remaining in it without tracking the distance. Close enough that she could see clearly what was happening in his expression, all of it, without the comfortable blur of distance. You came here with one trunk, he said. She blinked. Yes. And 2 ledger books. Yes. And a letter, he said, addressed to a man who was already dead, from a man who needed someone he could trust. She was very still. I made you a poor proposition, he said. I offered you a position when I should have offered you a partnership. I married you because it was legally convenient and I had enough sense to recognize that I trusted you. I did not. He stopped. He started again. I did not tell you what I had come to understand, about why I trusted you, about what it meant. She looked at him. She had spent 3 months learning his silences, the weight of his words, the things he conveyed without saying. She had become fluent in a language that most people never knew he spoke. What had you come to understand? She said. He looked at her for a long moment. That I was afraid, he said. After Eleanor, I thought I was being efficient. I thought I was solving a practical problem. He shook his head slightly. I was hiding. I married you because it was the closest I could come to the thing I actually wanted without having to admit that I wanted it. The room was absolutely still. Clara looked at him. Her heart was doing something it had no business doing in the middle of what was already a complicated enough evening. Nathaniel, she said carefully, are you saying something to me? I'm trying to, he said. Then say it plainly, she said. You know I prefer it. Something moved in his face. The closest thing to a smile she had ever seen there, and warmer than she had known he kept in reserve. I am in love with you, he said. I have been for some time. I have been conducting myself as though it were merely professional respect, and it is not merely that. It is considerably more than that, and tonight... He stopped. Tonight, watching you speak the truth into a room full of people who had every reason to doubt it. I am not going to pretend anymore that what I feel is something smaller than what it is. Clara looked at him. The summer night was everywhere around them. She thought about the German agricultural texts on her father's kitchen table. She thought about the letter that arrived 6 months too late and what she had done with it. She thought about 1 trunk and 2 ledger books and a woman who had walked into a future she made herself. She had not made room in any of that planning for this, and yet here it was. I told Charles, she said slowly, that I had enough to think about without adding something to it. Charles, Nathaniel said, with a particular tonelessness that told her exactly what he thought of his cousin's timing. He said, she continued, that not adding it didn't mean it wasn't there. Nathaniel waited. She looked at him, at this man who had asked her a single question about a punctuation error in a contract, and then given her an office and his trust, and 9 months of being seen in exactly the way she had spent her whole life being overlooked, and she made a decision with the same clarity she brought to every other decision she made. He was right, she said. Nathaniel was very still. It's there, she said. It has been for some time. I have also been conducting myself as though it were something else. He looked at her. His hand came up slowly, and he tucked a strand of hair back from her face. Just the quiet, careful touch of a man who has been waiting a long time to be certain he was allowed. And she leaned into it, the smallest possible amount, just enough to answer the question, without either of them having to use any more words. They stood in the quiet of the emptied dining room. The summer night waited outside. The long table held the marks of the evening, the evidence of 16 people and 1 restored family and 1 truth finally told. And Clara Whitmore, who had learned at a kitchen table that knowledge was a kind of armor and that the most important work was the work no one saw you doing, stood in the room where she had done her most visible work, yet in the warmth of her husband's attention, and felt for the first time in a very long time, completely unhurriedly, precisely at home. The morning after the dinner, Clara woke before dawn. She lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the house breathe around her, and she thought about what had happened in the dining room the night before. Not the public part, the documents, the figures Henry Pierce's face. The other part. The part that had happened after everyone left in the quiet of the emptied room with Nathaniel's hand against her face, and the summer night pressing soft against the windows. She had not slept much. Not from distress, from something closer to the feeling of standing on ground that had shifted beneath her feet, and finding to her surprise that the new position was steadier than the old one. She got up. She dressed. She went to the estate office. She had work to do. That at least was constant. The Southern accounts were in good order. They had been in good order since the second week she arrived because she had put them there and kept them there. But there were things to follow up on now: the formal documentation of the Pierce lease restoration, the correspondence with Graves about the legal proceedings against Caldwell, the question of who would manage the Northern accounts in the interim. She was halfway through the Graves correspondence when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. It was 7:15. He looked at her. She looked at him. For a half-second, neither of them moved, and in that half-second, Clara felt the particular awkwardness of two people who have said honest things to each other in the dark and must now account for it in the daylight. Nathaniel came in. He sat down across from her desk, which he almost never did. He usually stood or leaned against the frame, always with one foot in the room, and one out, the posture of a man who did not want to take up more space than necessary. He sat. "Did you sleep?" he said. "Some," she said. "I didn't," he said. She looked at him. "I kept thinking," he said, "about what I said. Whether I said it well. Whether the timing was." He stopped. "You had just managed an extraordinary evening. You'd given the Pierces their land back. You'd stood in front of everyone in this county and put the truth on the table. And then Nathaniel," she said. He stopped. "You said it plainly," she said. "I asked you to. I prefer it that way. The timing was what it was." She paused. "I said what I said in return because it was true, not because the evening made me sentimental." He looked at her. "I know," he said quietly. "That's not what I was worried about." "Then what were you worried about?" He was quiet for a moment. "That I had asked something of you," he said, without being clear about what I was offering in return. She set her pen down. This was, she thought, the most complicated, simple man she had ever encountered. "What are you offering?" she said. "Everything," he said. Like it was a straightforward answer. Like it was just a number in a column, clean and verifiable. The whole of it. Not a practical arrangement. Not a partnership of convenience. He held her gaze. "I want you here because you want to be here, not because it's the best situation available to you." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the letter that had arrived after her father died. She thought about packing one trunk. She thought about the moment she had sat across from this man and pointed to a comma that had been shifted 3 words to the right, and the look on his face, then, not surprise exactly, but recognition, as though something he had been trying to locate had suddenly appeared. "Nathaniel," she said, "I have made every decision of my adult life deliberately. I do not stay where I do not want to be." She held his gaze. "I am here because I want to be here. That has been true for longer than last night." The silence that followed was the kind that didn't need filling. He nodded. Once. The way he confirmed a figure that had been verified. She picked up her pen. "Now," she said, "I need to finish this letter to Graves, and then I need to talk to you about the Northern accounts because someone needs to manage them while you decide on a replacement, and I have some thoughts." Something moved in his face. The warmth she had not known he kept there surfacing briefly before the working expression reasserted itself. "I expected you might," he said. "Sit there," she said. "I'll read you the letter first." He sat. Graves arrived that Thursday with the formal documents. The proceedings against Thomas Caldwell had moved with a speed that surprised Clara until Graves explained that Hartwell had been considerably energized by the evening. "He told me," Graves said, settling into the chair across from Nathaniel's desk, "that in 30 years on the bench he has seen 2 cases of fraud presented with that level of documentation. One was by a Philadelphia lawyer with a staff of 6. The other was yours, Mrs. Harrington." Clara said nothing. She was looking at the documents he had laid on the desk. "The charge," Graves continued, "is misappropriation and forgery. The forgery charge pertains to the Pierce lease amendment. Misappropriation covers the financial fraud across 6 years." He paused. "Caldwell has retained a lawyer, a man named Fitchett from Charlottesville." Nathaniel said, "Fitchett is competent." "He is." Graves agreed. "He has already been to see me. He's proposing that his client make full restitution in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. The room was quiet. Clara looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Graves. "What's your recommendation?" Nathaniel said. "Legally." Graves said, "You have every right to push for full prosecution. The evidence supports it. The forgery charge alone carries significant weight." He paused. "Personally, and I say this having seen a great many of these cases, restitution in full is not nothing. Caldwell has a wife, 3 children. A criminal conviction changes the lives of people who had no part in what he did." Nathaniel was quiet. Clara watched him. She had an opinion. She was waiting to hear his. "The Pierces," Nathaniel said finally. "Their lease is already secured," Graves said. "That doesn't change regardless of the criminal proceedings." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I want the restitution, full. Not a negotiated amount, the full $4,312. And I want a formal signed acknowledgement of what was done, every specific act, signed by Caldwell himself." He paused. "In exchange for that, I'll accept the settlement and not pursue prosecution." Graves nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." "And I want one more thing," Nathaniel said. Graves waited. "He writes a letter," Nathaniel said, "to every person in this county he spoke to after his dismissal. The story he told about his departure, about Mrs. Harrington's role in it. He corrects it, in writing, by name." Clara looked at him. She had not asked for that. She had not expected it. Graves raised his eyebrows slightly. "That's unusual." "It's necessary," Nathaniel said. He was not looking at Graves. He was looking at Clara steadily, with that direct quality of his that left no ambiguity about what he meant. What was done to her reputation was deliberate. It should be undone the same way it was done publicly and on record. Graves made a note. Clara looked at the document on the desk. She looked at Nathaniel. "You didn't mention that condition before," she said quietly. "I decided on it this morning," he said. "After we spoke." She understood. He had meant what he said about everything. This was what everything looked like in practice. She looked back at the document. "Thank you," she said. It was a small thing to say. It was inadequate. She said it anyway because it was true, and because she had learned that the truest things were usually the ones that needed the fewest words. The letter from Caldwell arrived 11 days later. It was a Thursday. She was in the estate office when Nathaniel brought it in. He set it on her desk without speaking, and she understood from his expression that he had already read it. She picked it up. Thomas Caldwell wrote like a man who had learned to write in a church schoolroom and never moved far beyond it. Careful, deliberate, the handwriting of someone for whom the physical act of setting words down had always required effort. She thought about that for a moment before she read the content. She thought about a man who had worked hard his whole life and somewhere along the way had decided that the gap between what he had and what he believed he deserved could be bridged by numbers shifted in ledgers. She thought about the $11 in 1811. She read the letter. It was 2 pages. The first page was the acknowledgement. Graves had specified the factual account of what he had done, each specific act, enumerated, signed at the bottom in his careful, deliberate hand. She read through it with the same methodical attention she had brought to 6 weeks of ledgers. Every figure she had documented was there. He had not minimized. Fitchett had clearly advised him that minimizing was not available as an option. The second page was not part of the formal agreement. It was addressed to her directly. "Mrs. Harrington, I am not writing this because my lawyer asked me to. He didn't. I am writing it because I have had 11 days to sit with what was found, and I believe you deserve to hear it plainly from me. I told myself for 6 years that I was owed what I took. I told myself I had managed this estate through hard years, and the compensation wasn't equal to the work. I believed this. I want you to know that not as an excuse, but because I think you are the kind of person who wants to understand how something happens, not just that it happened. When you arrived, I was afraid of you within the first week. Not because I thought you would find what you found. Because I could see you were the kind of person who looked at things the way they actually were. I have spent 9 years in a position where no one looked that carefully. You were right to look. I was wrong to make it necessary. I cannot make the Pierce family right for what they suffered this past year. I cannot make the estate right for what was taken. I can only say that the work you did was honest and thorough, and I would have been glad in another life to have worked alongside someone who could do it. T. Caldwell. Clara set the letter down. She sat for a moment. Nathaniel was watching her. "Well," she said. "Yes," he said. She picked the letter back up. She read the second page again. She was trying to locate what she felt about it, and finding that it was more complicated than she had expected. There was no triumph in it. There should have been. Perhaps she had earned the right to some satisfaction, but what she actually felt reading Thomas Caldwell's careful, difficult handwriting on a plain white page was something closer to sorrow. The clean, uncomplicated sorrow of waste. 6 years. A family's land. A man's better self buried under the accounting of his grievances. "He's right about one thing," she said. "Which thing?" "He was owed more than he was given," she said. "Not what he took. But the original inequity, the gap between the work he did and the recognition he received, that was real. I've seen the records. The estate grew considerably under his management in the first 4 years. He was not compensated proportionately." Nathaniel was quiet. "That doesn't excuse it," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it explains the $11 in 1811. She set the letter down. "He started with what he thought was owed, and then it became a habit. And then the habit became a system. And then he had built something he couldn't stop without confessing it." She looked at the desk in front of her. "That's how most of these things go, I think. They don't start as what they become." Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. "You're more generous than I am," he said. "I'm not generous," she said. "I just want to understand the mechanism. If you understand how it started, you can prevent the next one." He was quiet again. She could feel him thinking. "I should have been paying attention," he said. "For 9 years. "You trusted him," she said. "That's not the same as negligence." "It's close enough that the difference doesn't comfort me much." She looked at him. He was carrying something. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the particular quality of the silence he'd been keeping since Graves had left Thursday. Not guilt exactly, but responsibility. The weight of a man who has decided he is accountable for what happens under his roof, even the things he didn't know about. She understood that quality. Her father had had it too. "Nathaniel," she said, "you have now put systems in place that make this significantly harder to repeat. You have documentation practices that didn't exist before. You have someone reviewing all accounts, not just the Southern holdings." She paused. "And you will hire someone good for the Northern accounts, someone whose work I can cross-reference and who can cross-reference mine. That's not a system that failed. That's a system that works." He looked at her. "You're already thinking about who to hire," he said. "I have 2 names," she admitted. He made that sound again, the almost laugh, the one she had been collecting. "Of course you do," he said. "Yeah." The letter Caldwell sent to the county, the public correction, arrived in people's hands the following week. Clara did not see it happen. She did not visit Mitchell's store or make the social calls that would have let her observe the county's reaction in real time. She went about her work, and she let the information do what information does. When it is accurate and signed and specific, she let it travel. What came back to her arrived the same way the original gossip had, sideways through Dorothea, who told her things while doing something else. "Mrs. Henderson sent a note," Dorothea said on a Tuesday, refilling the coffee, "asking if you'd come to call." "Did she?" Clara said. "She and the other ladies, they've been talking. About the dinner. About what you did with the Pierce family." Dorothea set the pot down. "Mrs. Henderson's exact words, from what I understand, were that it was the finest thing done in this county since the church rebuilt after the fire." Clara looked at her coffee cup. "That's kind of her," she said. "It's accurate. Dorothea said. Which is different from kind. Clara smiled. 2 days later, Reverend Alcott stopped her after Sunday service. He shook her hand and told her simply that what she had done for the Pierce family was good work. Not effusive, not ceremonial, just good work, said plainly, by a man who did not offer compliments as a social currency. She thanked him. And on Thursday morning, Isolde Brandt called. Clara had not expected that. She had expected Friedrich's public apology to be the end of it. The accounting balanced the matter closed. She had not expected his wife to appear in the Harrington parlor at 10:30 on a Thursday, dressed simply without her husband. They sat across from each other. Isolde Brandt was 31, Clara estimated, small and precise and watchful in the way of a woman who has learned to observe because observation is what's available to her. I want to apologize, Isolde said, for what I said after the dinner, to people I called on in Richmond. Clara looked at her. I know what was said, Clara told her. You don't need to detail it. I want to. Isolde's voice was steady, but her hands in her lap were not entirely still. What I said was not I was repeating what my husband said, but I said it as if it were my own view. I didn't know you. I had no view. I was simply angry. Angry, Clara said. Isolde looked at her directly. It was the same look she had given Clara across the dinner table the night of the formal dinner, the look of a woman who had been watching carefully for a long time. My husband thinks he is very clever, Isolde said. He is often. But he is also careless in the way of people who have not often faced consequences. She paused. When he said those things in German, I told him to stop. You heard me. I did. He didn't listen. No, Clara said. He didn't. I was angry at him, Isolde said. And then afterward, when he was embarrassed, I was angry at you, because it was easier. She said it without flinching. Clara respected that. That is not an excuse. It is only an explanation. I understand, Clara said. He has recalculated, Isolde said. The word was dry enough that Clara understood she was using Friedrich's own language deliberately, with full awareness. He now believes you are a valuable person to know. I'm aware, Clara said. I believe that also, Isolde said, for different reasons. They looked at each other. Clara thought about what Charles had said. Some people apologize because they feel sorry. Some people apologize because they've done the arithmetic. She looked at Isolde Brandt and tried to determine which kind this was and found that she could not make a clean determination, which probably meant it was both. Tell me, Clara said. Do you speak any languages other than German and English? Isolde blinked at the change of direction. French, she said after a moment. My mother was from Lyon. My father wanted me to learn French next, Clara said. After German. He died before we got to it. She paused. If you are going to be in Virginia much longer, perhaps you would be willing to trade. My German is already good, but your French would be more practical for the Richmond business contacts. Isolde stared at her. Then something happened in her face, something that released some held tension she had been carrying into this room dropping away. You are extraordinary, she said. I've been told that recently, Clara said. I'm not sure I believe it. I think I am simply practical. Those are not different things, Isolde said. Clara looked at her, and then, because it was true, and because she had always preferred truth to performance, she smiled genuinely, not the composed public smile she had been wearing since August, but the real one, the one her father used to say could light up a room without her knowing it. Isolde Brandt smiled back. It was a Saturday evening when everything that had been building finally arrived at the thing Clara had not let herself look at directly. Nathaniel found her in the library. She had been there for an hour, not reading, just sitting with a book in her lap, and the summer evening going soft outside, and thinking about everything. The past 4 months. The trunk, and the letter, and the comma in the wrong place, and 6 weeks of quiet, methodical work, and a dining room that had been twice now the site of something significant. He came in without a word, and sat beside her. Not across the room in the other chair, but beside her on the settee, close enough that she was aware of his presence, the way you're aware of a fire, the warmth of it, the specific quality of the heat. "I want to ask you something," he said. She closed the unread book. "I want to build something," he said. "On the estate. I've been thinking about it since the dinner, since what you said about your father and the texts he used to teach you." He paused. "A room. For books. Not a private library. A room in town accessible. For anyone who wants to use it." She turned to look at him. "A lending library," she said. "Something like it." He was working through it as he said it. She could tell the way his phrasing was slightly more tentative than usual, feeling for the shape of an idea still forming. "There are children in this county who will never have access to what you had, what your father gave you. Not because they can't learn, because the books aren't available." She looked at him. "That's what you've been thinking about," she said. "Since you told me about the Prussian agricultural texts," he said. "Since you said your father taught you because the best knowledge was in German, and he didn't see why you shouldn't have it." He met her eyes. "That's what changed your life. Not luck, not circumstance. A man who decided his daughter deserved to understand the world she lived in." Clara was very quiet. She thought about her father at the kitchen table, the candle between them, his finger moving along the line of text, patient and unhurried, as though there was all the time in the world to teach a girl what the world was made of. She thought about the comma in the lease, the mill on the river bend, the $11 in 1811, everything that she had been able to see, because her father had sat her down and decided against all social instruction that seeing clearly was not a gift reserved for men. "He would have loved this county," she said. Her voice was steady. She made sure of it. "I know," Nathaniel said quietly. "I would have liked to know him." She breathed. "The library," she said. "I want to help plan it." "I know you do," he said. "I'm asking because I want us to do it together, not because it's useful, because it matters to you, which means it matters to me." She looked at him. This man, this quiet, direct, complicated man who had appeared at her door in Fredericksburg with his hat in his hands and a single question, and had then simply, steadily, without performance or declaration, made room for her in every part of his life, without once asking her to be smaller than she was. "Nathaniel?" she said. "Yes." "I need to tell you something I haven't said plainly." He waited. "I was not unhappy before I came here," she said. "I want you to understand that. I was not a woman who needed to be rescued. I had work. I had purpose. My father's death was a loss, but I would have managed. I had options." "I know," he said. "I chose this," she said. "I wrote back to that letter because I wanted to, because it interested me, because the work interested me." She paused. "And then you interested me. And I told myself for a long time that it was only professional regard, because professional regard was something I knew how to manage." He was very still beside her. "What I feel for you," she said, "is not professional regard. It is not gratitude, though I am grateful. It is not security, though I feel secure." She looked at him directly. "I love you. I have been avoiding saying it in exactly those words, because I have a habit of being precise about things, and I wanted to be sure before I was precise about this." The room was completely quiet. "And you're sure?" he said. "I have verified it thoroughly," she said. "The evidence is conclusive." And then finally, Nathaniel Harrington laughed. A real laugh, full and genuine, the laugh of a man who has been holding something carefully for a very long time and has just been given permission to set it down. She felt it move through her like warmth. "Clara," he said when the laugh settled. "Yes." He took her hand. Both of his hands around hers, the way Henry Pierce had pressed her hand at the door, but different, completely different, with a weight and a specificity that was only for her. "I am going to spend the rest of my life," he said, "making sure this county understands what it has in you." She looked at their hands. She thought, this is what everything looks like. This exactly, this a library planned over a summer evening. A man who laughed when she was precise about love. $4,000 of fraud uncovered, and a family's land restored, and a language spoken at the right moment to a room full of people who had forgotten to wonder what she might know. She turned her hand over in his and held on. "Start with the library," she said. "The county can figure out the rest on its own." He looked at her. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And the summer evening moved around Harrington Manor, warm and full and unhurried, carrying with it the particular quality of a season at its fullness. Everything ripened, everything arrived, everything exactly where it was meant to be. The library opened on the first Saturday of October. It was not a grand building. Nathaniel had been clear about that from the beginning, not because he couldn't afford grand, but because grand was not the point. The point was a room with good light and solid shelving, and a door that opened to anyone who wanted to walk through it. He had converted a storefront on the main street of Millhaven, the small town 3 miles from the estate, and he had spent 6 weeks working with Clara on what would go in it. She had opinions. He had expected that. What he had not fully anticipated was the specificity of those opinions, or how quickly she could move from principle to practical execution when given both the authority and the resources to do so. She had written to 4 booksellers in Richmond and 2 in Philadelphia. She had organized the collection by subject rather than alphabetically, which she argued was how a person actually looked for knowledge by what they needed to understand, not by the first letter of the author's name. She had negotiated a lending system that allowed farmers and working people to borrow without a deposit on the grounds that the people most in need of books were the least likely to have spare cash to leave as collateral. Nathaniel had watched all of this with the particular expression she had come to recognize as his version of delight, contained quiet, visible only if you knew where to look. He knew where to look by now. The morning of the opening, Clara stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, looking at the shelves. Full shelves. Floor to ceiling, on 2 walls, the books arranged in her system spines out. Labels she had written herself in her small precise hand identifying each section. She had not cried when her father died. She had not cried when she packed the trunk, or walked out of the Fredericksburg house for the last time, or stood at the grave and made her promise. She was not generally a woman who cried. She stood in the library on the first Saturday of October, and felt her eyes go hot, and did not entirely win the battle. Nathaniel was behind her. He said nothing. He put his hand on her shoulder lightly and left it there. "He would have stood exactly where you're standing," she said. Her voice was almost steady. "And he would have pulled out a book immediately and sat down and read it and not said a word for 40 minutes. "That sounds," Nathaniel said, "like someone I would have gotten along with very well." She laughed. The laugh broke something loose that had been sitting heavy in her chest, and she was grateful for it. She turned. She looked at her husband. She looked at the room he had built because she had told him about a kitchen table in Fredericksburg and a set of Prussian agricultural texts and a man who had decided his daughter deserved to understand the world. "Knowledge belongs to those brave enough to seek it," she said. He looked at her. "That's what I want above the door," she said. "If you agree." "I agree," he said without hesitation. She nodded. She turned back to the shelves. She pressed her fingers briefly against the spine of the nearest book, a natural history, thick and solid and real, and she took a breath. "All right," she said. "Open the door." So, the town came, not all at once, and not without the particular Virginia caution of people who want to see a thing before they commit to an opinion of it. But they came in 1s and 2s at first, then in small groups, drawn partly by curiosity and partly by the word that had been traveling the county since the formal dinner in August. The word that said there was something worth paying attention to happening at Harrington Manor and in the town it served. Henry Pierce came with his wife Martha. Martha Pierce walked straight to the agriculture section and stood there for 10 minutes reading the titles, and then turned to Clara with an expression that needed no words. "Henry said you saved the farm," Martha said. "I don't think he has the full range of what that means, not just the land. What it means to a woman when the place she's built her life in is threatened." She stopped. "I do." Clara held her gaze. "I know you do," she said. "That's exactly why the farm is still yours." Martha Pierce took her hand and held it for a moment without speaking. Then she turned back to the shelves and pulled out a book on soil management and took it to a chair and sat down and began to read. Clara watched her. She thought, there it is. That is what this room is for. Reverend Alcott brought 3 of the church families. 2 of the county commissioners came separately, which she noted and appreciated separately, meant they had each decided independently that it was worth their time. The school teacher from the Mill District arrived with her hands already outstretched toward the history section and spent an hour making a list. And then, at 11:30, Friedrich and Isolde Brandt walked in. Friedrich looked around the room. He looked at the shelves. He looked at the people moving through them, farmers and merchants, and a young woman who worked at the mill, who had already borrowed 2 books and was examining a third. He looked at Clara. "I owe you a business conversation," he said. "When you have time. The Hamburg contract, there are 3 more agreements in progress that I believe would benefit from your eye." Clara studied him. "You want me to review your contracts?" she said. "I want to ensure they are not ambiguous," he said. "The way the last one was, before they are signed." She glanced at Nathaniel, who was standing near the door talking with one of the commissioners, and not watching her at all, which meant he was absolutely watching her. "Send them to the estate office," she said. "I'll review them. My fee is standard for contract consultation in the Richmond market." Friedrich blinked. "Fee?" he said. "Yes," she said pleasantly. "This is professional work, Mr. Brandt. I charge for professional work." A pause. Then Friedrich Brandt did something she had not expected. He smiled, a real one, not the performed charm of the dinner party, but something more genuine and slightly rueful, the smile of a man who has just been correctly and fairly outmaneuvered. "Of course," he said, "the Richmond rate." "I'll send you the figure," she said. He nodded. He moved toward the shelves. Isolde caught Clara's eye and gave her a look of such precise, compressed satisfaction that Clara had to look away to keep from laughing outright. It was Charles who found her alone for a moment late in the morning, when the room had gotten busy enough that she could step to one side without being immediately reclaimed. He appeared at her elbow in the way he had, not quite sneaking, but with the energy of someone who has been waiting for their moment. "You know what I keep thinking about," he said. "I rarely know what you're thinking about, Charles. That's part of your charm." He grinned. "That first dinner, Brandt going on in German. You just sitting there pouring tea perfectly calm, and the whole time, you understood every word." "Yes." "Did you know then that you were going to answer him?" She considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "I didn't decide. I just stopped not deciding." Charles thought about this. "That's terrifying, actually." "For whom?" "For anyone who's ever assumed something about you." She looked at him. "That's a very perceptive observation," she said. "I'm going to pretend I'm not surprised." He laughed. "Nathaniel says I'm perceptive roughly once a year. I'm going to enjoy this." He paused, the laugh settling into something more serious. "I'm going back to Charleston next week." "I know. I'm going to miss this place." He looked around the library. "Miss you, actually, both of you. Though Nathaniel would sooner ride into a river than say something that sentimental, so I'm saying it for both of us." Clara looked at him. This young man who had arranged a dinner without thinking through its consequences, who had sat in her parlor asking her what she noticed, who had stood beside her at a window and said like he'd been handed something he didn't know he was missing. "You were good company, Charles," she said. "Even when you were maddening." "Especially then," he said. "Especially then," she agreed. He pressed her hand briefly in the way he'd picked up from Henry Pierce. She had noticed him do it at the dinner, and apparently it had stuck. Then he went back into the room, and she heard his voice rising cheerful and present, finding a new group to talk to. The twist came in the afternoon. She had not expected it, which was, she supposed, the nature of twists. She was reviewing the lending register, who had taken what because she intended to track what the county actually wanted to read, versus what she had assumed it wanted when Nathaniel came to find her, with a particular quality of quiet that she recognized as the precursor to information she had not yet received. He put a letter on the table in front of her. She looked at it. The return address was Philadelphia. She looked at him. "Read it," he said. She picked it up. She read it. It was from a man named Edward Coles, writing on behalf of a small group of Philadelphia scholars and legal reformers who had apparently been hearing things about an estate in Virginia, about a woman who had uncovered 6 years of financial fraud through independent investigation, about a formal dinner at which she had presented documented evidence that resulted in a full settlement and public restitution, about a German conversation at a dinner table. That last part surprised her. She had not thought the German dinner story had traveled as far as Philadelphia. She had been wrong. Edward Coles wrote to ask whether Mrs. Clara Harrington might be willing to correspond with their group and to share the methodology she had used in her investigation, as they were working on proposals for legal reform around estate management and financial accountability in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They wanted her methods. They wanted to put them into law. She read the letter twice. She set it down. She was very quiet for a long moment. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." "Did you know about this?" "It arrived this morning," he said. "I know as much as you do." She looked at the letter again. The neat Philadelphia handwriting. The careful, formal language of educated men, asking in the most respectful terms they knew how to construct for the knowledge of a woman they had never met. She thought about her father. She thought about what he would say. She thought he would probably say, "Well, Clara, there it is again." "I'm going to write back," she said. "I know," Nathaniel said. "This is going to take time," she said. Correspondence documentation explaining the methodology clearly enough that it can be adapted for legal purposes. That's significant work. "I know," he said again. "You're not concerned about the time it will take from the estate accounts." "I have someone I trust managing the estate accounts," he said, "and I've just hired a second person for the Northern Holdings, who I also trust." He looked at her steadily. "The estate does not require all of you, Clara. It requires the part of you that wants to give it. The rest—" He gestured at the letter at the library, around them, at the air between them. "The rest belongs to whatever this is becoming." She looked at him. She thought about a woman who had packed one trunk and written a letter to a dead man's employer, and walked into a future she made herself not knowing what it would hold, only knowing that she had skills, and she intended to use them. She had not imagined this. Any of it. Not the library. Not the letter from Philadelphia. Not this man looking at her in a room full of books on a Saturday in October, with an expression that said without any ambiguity at all that he considered himself the lucky one. She picked up the Philadelphia letter. She folded it once and held it. "My father used to say," she said, "that the most dangerous thing in the world was a woman who had read enough books to know what was possible." Nathaniel looked at her. "He was right," he said. "He usually was," she said. She wrote to Philadelphia that evening. She sat in the estate office, her office the one she had walked into on the first day with one trunk, and the clear intention of being useful. The one where she had cross-referenced invoices by candlelight and built a case that changed a family's future. And she wrote 2 pages in her small, precise hand and did not cross a single word out. She explained the methodology clearly. She described the cross-referencing system. She described the importance of the archived records, the value of going back farther than the obvious discrepancy, the necessity of building a case that was not merely correct but unassailable. She described what it meant to be a woman presenting evidence in a room full of men, and why the documentation had to be twice as thorough as it would have needed to be otherwise. She wrote that part without softening it. She sealed the letter. She addressed it. Then she sat for a moment in the quiet of the office, her hands flat on the desk, and she looked at the room around her. The filing cabinet with its careful organization. The secondary ledger on the shelf. The small window that looked out onto the estate grounds dark. Now the October night settled and cool outside the glass. She thought about every room that had shaped her. The kitchen in Fredericksburg. The estate office first week smelling of old paper and someone else's work. The basement storage room, 2 candles and a brittle cord and 6 years of history in bundled documents on a stone floor. The dining room twice, once with a German conversation that changed the temperature of the air, once with 16 people and $4,000 of truth on the table. And this room. This one where she had built something real out of numbers and patience, and the stubborn refusal to accept that a discrepancy was just a discrepancy. She heard Nathaniel's step in the corridor. He appeared in the doorway. He looked at the sealed letter on the desk. "Done," he said. "Done," she said. He came in. He sat across from her in the chair he had sat in the morning after the German dinner, when everything had still been in its early shape. The chair he had claimed as his in this room, the one that meant he was there as himself, and not as her employer or her husband, but as the person he was when no one was performing anything. "What did you tell them?" he said. "Everything they need to know," she said. "And one thing they didn't ask for." "Which was?" She looked at him. "That the methodology only works if the person using it is allowed to work," she said. "That the most sophisticated accounting system in the world is worthless if the person who understands it is told her understanding doesn't count." She paused. "I told them that the first reform should not be procedural. It should be the decision to listen to the person doing the work, regardless of who that person is." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "They'll print that," he said. "I'm counting on it," she said. He looked at her across the desk. The lamplight between them steady and warm, the October night quiet outside. "Clara," he said. "Yes. I want to ask you something." "Ask." "A year ago," he said, "if someone had told you that you would spend the summer uncovering a financial fraud, restoring a family's land, opening a library, and being corresponded with by Philadelphia reformers, what would you have said?" She thought about it honestly. "I would have said that I was capable of all of it," she said. "I would have said that the only question was whether anyone would give me the conditions to do it. And if someone had told you," he said more quietly, "that you would be sitting in an office in Virginia with a man who—" He stopped, started again. "With a husband who thought you were the most remarkable person he had ever known." She looked at him. She thought about the comma in the contract, the leather trunk, the long table set for dinner, the way Nathaniel had turned in a room full of people and watched her speak the truth without once suggesting she needed his help to do it. She thought about standing at her father's grave in the spring rain and making a promise she hadn't known yet how to keep. "I would have hoped," she said softly, "for exactly this." The lamp held steady between them. Outside, the October night settled its full weight over the Virginia fields, over the Pierce farm, with its 40 acres and its restored lease, and its family sleeping easy, for the first time in a year, over the town, with its new library, standing solid on the Main Street door, shut for the evening, but already holding the shape of what it was meant to become. Over a county that had looked at a woman in a plain dress with no diamonds and decided it knew everything about her. Over all of it, the night moved, and in the estate office of Harrington Manor, Clara Whitmore set her hands flat on the desk and looked at the man who had asked her a single question about a comma and given her in return every condition she had ever needed to become fully, irrevocably herself. She had walked into this future with one trunk and her father's voice in her head and the absolute, unshakable conviction that what she knew was worth something. She had been right. She had always been right. And the woman they thought could not understand had understood everything, had always understood everything, and had simply waited with the patience of someone who has been thoroughly taught for the world to be ready to hear it.